Let's see. Saturday. This will be story number 3 of the holiday weekend, the Christmas weekend. So, another auto parts store story. This one's similar to the other one, only slightly different. It's a different location this time. This time, no, I was still in Reno. So I think I was visiting my buddy Greg or somebody else at another auto parts store, and the other, it's actually in Sparks, another end of town. And so I was over there visiting a buddy. Gearheads, we all hang out. And, work, it doesn't matter what auto parts store you work at. Oh, was I working at Super Shops? I could have been at Super Shops then. I think I was working at Super Shops. I was working at Super Shops during both of those last stores. That's where it was, Super Shops. You guys know what Super Shops is? Eddie Hill represented those guys. He raced for them. Super Shops is a performance hot rod shop. And we also had a shop called, it was named Yule Brothers, and it was these two, Mark and Brad. These guys raced, and that was their shop. And they had like a dyno, and they had all sorts of stuff. This is in Reno. It was really cool. And their shop was across the street from the MGM Grand, which I think is like a Harley dealer now or something. But man, they had everything. It was like going into a Summit catalog or a PAW catalog. Both places were. You could buy anything and everything you wanted. Summit didn't exist then. It's there now, but it didn't exist at that time. But it was pretty cool. We saw lots of cool stuff. I never worked at Yule Brothers, but I knew those guys. Not super good. I mean, street racers knew each other, but those guys were legit. Not just they weren't street racing. They were legit actual racers. But this story has to do with another auto parts store. Neither one of those, but that's where I was. So I was hanging out in Sparks, another store, visiting, I think Greg or somebody else I was visiting. I think I was visiting the manager of the store. Got a Nova or something. Anyway, I'm in there in the back counter hanging out. It was like probably a Thursday or Friday night. We were probably all getting ready to go race and planning to shut the store down. It could have been late, like 9 or 10. I think it was getting ready to be closing time, and everybody's closing up, and he's going on, we're getting ready, and then this guy walks up, and he wasn't from around town, and I'm going to say he wasn't from the United States. He had a really thick accent. I don't know where he was from. I don't really recognize it, but I know that he came in there and he was saying he had a leak. And the guy behind the counter was like, yeah, okay, leak. And the guy's like, yeah, leak. And he's like, is it getting hot? And the guy's, oh yeah, it's getting hot. As best as they could communicate. And he goes, okay, right there. And he points at like one of the end caps of one of the things, and there's some bar stop leak. And the guy goes for a small bottle, and he goes, no, you want the big one. So the guy goes, and he's like, this one? And he grabs the big one. He's like, yeah, that's the one you want. So he goes up the front counter, and I'm leaning against the counter, talking to this guy, and in my chrome Magnan man head, I'm thinking, he never asked him what kind of leak. He just assumed it was coolant. Interesting. So he takes up front, and I hear the ding, the cash register, and have a nice day, ding, and then they're cleaning up, and I hear like the polisher come out, and everybody's getting ready to leave, and I was like, okay, no, I'll see you guys later. See you down at Edison or wherever else. And they're like, okay, all right, see you downtown. And so I'm heading out the door. I'm like, see ya, and see you later, whoever's at the front register. And I open the door, and there's like I think it was a few years old Toyota Cressida, I think. I don't remember exactly. It could have been a Nissan Maxima. All I know is it was something, and it was like a white color, and it was import. And this guy was import also. And he's got kids in the car. I remember that. And this guy wasn't much older than I was, but he definitely didn't know anything about cars. And the hood's open, and he's got a bottle of bar stop leak sitting there with the cap off, and it's sitting on the front core support. And I look, and I just happen to see the radiator cap is not off. The cap on the valve cover is off. Yeah. And so I I looked at him and I grabbed this bottle and he goes, yes, leak, stop leak. And I was like, yes. And I said, here? And he went, yes. And I said, no. And I pointed at the radiator cap and I said, this here. And he obviously knew enough to comprehend because his eyes got real big. And about that time, the car started making a funny squeaking noise. It's making a funny squeaking noise. Do you guys hear that? Griswold's, right? It was kind of like that. And it just kind of squeaked and ground to a halt right there. Locked up tight. And he's looking at me and I'm looking at him and I was like, I'll be right back. So I opened the back door. I opened the front door and I walked by, hey, how's it going? And I walked back to the counter and I said to my buddy, I said, I said, remember that guy that came in and said he had a leak? And he goes, oh, yeah, the guy with the coolant leak. And I said, I don't remember him saying he had a coolant leak. And he goes, well, I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And I go, how sure? And he goes, well, he said it had a leak. And, I gave him some bar stop leak. And I said, well, what would happen if he had an oil leak? And he put bar stop leak in the engine. He's like, oh, that would be terrible. Wait, is that what happened? I go, yeah. The thing's sitting right out front. It stopped. And I said, you never asked him what kind of leak he had. I said, and you run this store. And he's like, he just put his head down. He's like, looks like I'm buying an engine, huh? And I'm like, looks like. And back then, we had service bays and stuff, and I'm pretty sure they ended up, just putting an engine in the guy's car. But it was really funny, like really funny, like really, it was hilariously funny. It was so funny. Oh gosh, it was funny. Bars stopped leaking an engine. Okay, that story's over. I'll give you another story today because it's Saturday. Story number 4 of this weekend. This had to do with me actually in one of the stores I worked in. Oh man, which one do I tell you? Yeah, so I'll tell you about this guy. Now at this time, I was probably I was in Idaho, I think, when this went on. And I went to work at a shop that got bought out by a big chain store right when I was working there. And so I used to go in this store all the time and get parts. And I got to know most people that worked there. And there's a guy that ran the store. He was super cool, and he had a red, I think it was red, could have been orange. He had a unibody Ford short bed truck. What it was, 61 to 65 or something. And if I remember correctly, the thing that was so cool about this truck and this guy was he ran the shop around the store. But the cool part about it was he was super humble, super nice guy. But the truck had a big block, he had an FE motor in it, I'm pretty sure. It either had I know it had a top loader 4-speed and a 9-inch with a posi. I don't remember what gears it was, but the thing, he and I were the only ones. At the time, I had this is a long, long time ago. This is before dropping and lowering and getting the stance right on trucks was cool. And I was a 67 to 72 Chevy guy. And I got my first one about this time. And I dropped them all on the ground. Not on the ground, but I had 235 60 15s on the front on some 7s. And on the back were some 10s with 275 60s. Or 8.5s if I get them, depending on what year it was on the back. And I always 71 to 72 because they were 5-lug and they had disc brakes. And, all my trucks looked the same. And Gerald had this Ford. His name was Gerald, that's right. Had this Ford, and it was red it was beautiful, like a dark red. And he had torque thrusts on it, old vintage torque thrusts. Same kind of a tire package, but it was a short bed. And it had top loader 4-speed, which was cool. And it had this hot big block Ford in it. I know it was an FE. I don't know if it was a 428 or a 390. Knowing him, he probably stroked 390 into something redonkulous. It was probably 450 cubic inches or 460 or something nuts. But it sounded good and ran really good. And that was what we drove every day. And I drove mine every day. And working at this shop, at this store, they hired me. They hired me because I forget the exact reason, but they had me come in and there was like a test I had to take. And I think it was an ASC auto parts test or something, but I took it and it was super easy. It was an easy test to take and I had no problem with it. I didn't know what it was. I didn't put any attention to it, but it got enough attention through the store's chain, this big chain store, through their computer system, that the other stores were trying to get me to move out and move to the whatever location and go work there. Which I don't know what that meant, but at the time I didn't really care. I was young and I wasn't really into it for a job. I was into it because I was hanging out with cool people. Everybody that worked in this store was gearheads, including the girls. They were gearheads and their boyfriends were gearheads. So it was like, a family of gearheads, and I remember they just accepted me and it was great. The kind of people that you just want to be around all the time. I didn't want to go home when I was done working, but I remember I was in the back on the counter and this guy comes in and he's holding up a rocker arm and he's like, "Hey, what's the torque spec on these?" I'm like, "There isn't one." And he's like, "There's a torque spec on everything." And I'm like, "There isn't one on that." And he just like got in my face. Like, "What do you mean there's no torque spec on this? You snotty-nosed little brat, think you know everything, blah, blah, blah," and starts getting on me, like in my face. And one of the girls comes over, and I was like young and a football player and big and kind of hot-tempered, and I wasn't really didn't have a whole lot of scruples around people. I wasn't good with people. And so I didn't really know how to take this, and I was trying to learn customer service. So I'm like trying not to get insulted by this guy who's getting in my face, but at the same time, it's not my job to deal with this guy. And one of the managers came over, and it was a girl, and she came over and she's like, "Excuse me, what's going on?" And he says, "Well, this guy right here won't tell me the answer to this question I'm asking him. And he thinks it's funny. He thinks he's being a smart guy, and he thinks he's being funny by telling me there's no torque spec to this." And she looks at me and she goes, "Well, what's the torque spec on that?" I said, "There isn't one." And he looks at her, or she looks at him and says, "If he says there isn't one, there isn't one." And he's like, "What is wrong with you people?" And he starts like cussing and freaking out and going nuts. And there's other people in the store who would come in there to visit and like were regular customers. And they're just kind of standing around watching. These are the type of customers that would drive by, and if your vehicle was in the parking lot, they knew you were there and they would come into the store because you were there. They were those kind of loyal customers. And this guy I'd never seen before, but he came in there and other customers like, "Hey man, they're telling you straight," and this guy's freaking out. And so Gerald walks over and he said, "What seems to be the problem?" He came out of the back room. I guess he heard the commotion. And I had probably said a couple colorful metaphors at the time and was threatening to probably take the guy out back. Maybe. Like I said, I was not the best at customer service. And, I was young and I wasn't smart. There's no excuse. I just, fighting never solves anything. And he walks up to this guy and he says, "What's your problem?" The guy holds up the rocker arm, holds up the nut, and he said, "I've asked multiple people, and this guy especially, and he says there's no torque spec to this. Rocker arm, nut." And Gerald looks at me, he says, "What's the torque spec to it?" And I said, "There isn't one." And he's like, "Well, if the kid said there isn't one, there isn't one." And the guy's like, "Well, how can you be sure?" And he says, "Tell you what, this kid's put on every part in this store at least twice. And if he says there isn't one, there isn't one." He said, "Have you asked him why there is no torque spec and what's really going on?" And the guy's like, "Well, no, because there's a torque spec." And he says, "Why don't we try it this way?" He looks at me, he goes, "Brand," he goes, "why is there no torque spec on that?" And I said, "Because it's off a small block Chevy, right?" The guy goes, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, there's no torque spec because it's adjustable. You got to adjust your valves. There is no torque spec to that nut." And the guy's like, "Well, that's ridiculous. I've never heard of that before." He said, "Look it up in any book. There's books over there. You want to read the torque spec?" And I think I pulled out something out of the counter and flipped through something, and I picked an engine, 327, 65 Chevy or something, and I said, "Right here's how you adjust your, and it gave you the intake, exhaust, and turn the engine to this level, and this is what you do, this whole pattern, intake, exhaust, exhaust, intake, whatever, and then rotate. And I said, here's how you do it. I said, you need to buy a book and get the manual. And at that, Gerald took the guy in the book, went up to the counter, sold him the book, and sent him out the door. And I forget what he was buying, maybe a valve cover gasket or intake set. But then Gerald came back and he said, if I hear one more colorful metaphor come out of your mouth, I'm going to stick my foot up your ass. And I was like, okay, all right, okay. Pardon the French right there. I said, okay. And I was more worried about upsetting him than I was about some customer. Because I really admired that guy. But that kind of stuff went on all the time. People would come in there and they were like dead sure of certain things. And I'd tell them straight what was going on. And the other customers would just come in there just because they wanted to know how to do it the right way. And, you know, they would pass. Oh, there's another story. This happened all the time. And it used to make me really mad. And I'm not like, you know, I'm not going to go up on a soapbox on this, but I'm going to tell you straight. There are girls in the auto parts industry in the counters that probably know more than most of the guys at the counters. And it's not because they're real gearheads or whatever, but it's because they learn and they study, and they really do know what they're doing. They remember what they read, they comprehend different, and they'll read something to get the information, and they'll retain it. And so the next time a customer comes in, she'll know behind the counter, more than likely before this guy knows now. And he's got to go look in a book or look on the screen and ask you dumb questions. She won't. She'll remember. And so if you're going to go to an auto parts store and you see a girl behind the counter, she's earned that spot. She's not up at the register brand new. She's not cleaning the floor. She's not up in administration doing books or whatever. She's behind the counter because that's where she best serves the customers. It means she knows something. And so this is where it happened. I was at the same store, and I'm talking to a customer, and I've got like a line down an aisle of people just standing to talk to me. I'm the only guy back there on the counter, and here is my manager next to me, and then another girl next to her. So I got two girls, and they've got, every once in a while they get somebody. And I'm talking to this guy, and I look over, and I'm seeing the line grow, and these girls are like, can we help you? And like, no, we'll wait for him. Can we help you? No, we'll wait for him. And I got tired of it. And I looked down, and I said, hey, I forget who was behind the other guy, and I said, she can help you just like I can. No, we want to talk to you. I said, she's going to know. And they're like, really? And I go, yeah, go ask her. And the other one over there, she's a gearhead too. Like, don't just come looking for me. We're all back here. This is a spot that, you know, we can all help you. And so I just started funneling customers over to them. Because not that they needed my help or validation, but like they knew their stuff. They really did. They could answer any of the questions or whatever that you needed. And if there was a technical issue, they knew where to find it. That's the most important thing. They don't have to remember everything. They have to know where to look. And in the old days, the book is where you looked. The auto parts stores that still have the book, oh man, those things are invaluable because they have all the information, all the cross references, and you can look at the pictures and find what you're looking at, and it doesn't matter what it fit. You know, most guys that are gearheads know what they're looking for. And, you know, nowadays, what used to be, they used to actually have it when they came up with the computer systems. If you guys remember this, some of the stores used to have one facing the other direction on the counter so you could look up your stuff yourself. Some of the other really cool parts stores had that. Not the chains, I don't think, did, but some of the cool parts stores, when they had computer systems, they would put one up there, and you were free to look up whatever you wanted and cruise around as long as you wanted. And they had stacks of books, those old folding stacks of books of, you know, all these different catalogs. Oh man, I miss those days. I miss the smell of those catalogs. That was a long time ago. It was a long time ago. Thanks for the journey down memory lane. But my point is, don't discount the girl behind the counter because she's the girl behind the counter. She might be, you know, Shirley Muldowney's granddaughter or something who grew up in the sport. You never know who she is. You never know who her dad is. A lot of these girls grow up with dads that were gearheads and grew up on racetracks. Those girls know their stuff. And, you know, if you're single and you can find a girl like that, That's what you want to marry. Probably not, though, because if she's a better wrench than you are, there's going to be competition. You'll never hear the end of it if you make a mistake. No, don't do that. Don't take my advice on that. But I hope you guys are having a happy holiday. Or Merry Christmas, not happy holidays. Merry Christmas, which was yesterday. So, tomorrow's Sunday. More stories to come. See you guys later.